She opened the door for a freezing boy, not knowing two billionaires were about to change her life forever. That night didn't just bring a stranger into her home. It brought secrets, power, and a truth that would shake two families to their core. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness is the one that exposes everything people tried to hide. If stories like this touch your heart, subscribe now, because the next one might stay with you longer than you expect. It was a cold evening in a quiet American neighborhood where the streetlights flickered like they were tired of trying. Inside a small, worn-down house, Annie Carter sat at the table, swinging her legs as her grandmother stirred a pot of soup on the stove. The house was old, the paint chipped, the furniture mismatched, but it was warm. Not just from the heat, but from something deeper. Something money couldn't buy. "Grandma," Annie said softly, tracing a circle on the table with her finger, "do you think people get lost on purpose?" Martha Carter didn't answer right away. She kept stirring, slow and steady, like she had all the time in the world. "Sometimes," she finally said, "people don't realize they're lost until it's already dark." Before Annie could respond, knock, knock. Both of them froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried something unusual. Hesitation. Fear. Annie turned toward the door, her eyes wide. "Grandma, someone's there." Martha's hand tightened slightly around the spoon. "Stay where you are." But Annie was already sliding off her chair. "Annie," Martha called, but the girl had already reached the door. The porch light outside barely worked, casting a dim glow through the frosted glass. A small shadow stood there. Still. Quiet. Annie hesitated for just a second, then unlocked the door. When she opened it, cold air rushed in. And there he was. A little boy. Maybe 5 years old. Thin coat. Messy hair. Arms wrapped tightly around himself like he was trying to hold onto whatever warmth he had left. His lips trembled slightly. "Hi," Annie said gently. "Who are you?" The boy swallowed. "My name is Oliver." His voice was small. Careful. I got lost." Behind Annie, Martha stepped closer, her presence firm now. "Lost?" she repeated, her tone cautious. Oliver nodded quickly, his eyes flicking between them. "I was at the park," he said. "I didn't see the time, and then it got dark. I tried to go home, but—" his voice cracked. "Everything looks different at night." He held up a small phone. "It died," he whispered. "I tried to call my dad." Annie looked at the phone, then at his face. There was no trick in his eyes. No story rehearsed. Just fear. Real fear. "I saw your light on," Oliver continued quietly. "Can I stay here, just for a little while? I just need to charge my phone." Then, almost embarrassed, he placed his hand on his stomach. "I'm kinda hungry too." Annie's chest tightened. She turned toward her grandmother. "Grandma, please." Martha didn't move. Her eyes studied the boy carefully. Too carefully. "I've seen this before," she said lowly. "Kids showing up at doors, saying they're lost." Annie frowned. "But he's just a kid." "Sometimes," Martha interrupted, "kids aren't alone. Sometimes they're sent ahead." The wind outside picked up, rattling the door slightly. Oliver's eyes widened. "I'm not lying," he said quickly. "I swear. I don't know where else to go." Silence filled the doorway. Annie looked at him again. Really looked this time. His hands were shaking. His shoes were dirty. And his eyes. They didn't belong to a child playing a trick. They belonged to someone who was scared of being turned away. "Grandma," Annie said softly, stepping closer, "you always say kindness matters." Martha's expression didn't change. "You said we should help people, even when it's hard." That made Martha pause. For a moment, The room held its breath. Then she sighed. Slow. Heavy. "All right," she said. Annie's face lit up instantly. "But," Martha added firmly, stepping forward, "you stay where I can see you. No wandering. No touching anything. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Oliver said quickly. He stepped inside. The warmth hit him immediately. He didn't move at first, like he wasn't sure it was real. Annie closed the door behind him and smiled. "Come sit," she said, pulling out a chair. Oliver sat slowly, still looking around. The house was small, simple, nothing impressive. But to him, it felt like safety. Martha brought a bowl of soup and placed it in front of him. "Eat," she said. Oliver picked up the spoon with both hands. The moment he took the first bite, something in his shoulders relaxed. Like he had been holding himself together all night, and finally didn't have to any more. Annie watched him closely, her chin resting in her hands. "You eat funny," she said with a small smile. Oliver paused, confused. "What?" "Like the food might disappear," she said. He looked down at the bowl, then back at her. "I guess," he admitted quietly. "I wasn't sure if I'd find any tonight." That hit deeper than anyone expected. Martha turned slightly, pretending to focus on the stove, but her eyes softened. "Slow down," she said. "There's more." Oliver hesitated. "Really?" "We don't let anyone leave hungry," she replied. "For the first time." Oliver smiled. "A small one, but real." On the table beside him, the phone began to charge. A faint light flickered on the screen. Oliver glanced at it every few seconds, like it was his only connection to something bigger. "Your dad's gonna be worried," Annie said. Oliver nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "He will be." Martha crossed her arms lightly. "What does he do?" she asked. Oliver shrugged. "He works a lot," he said. "Big stuff." Annie leaned in. "Like what?" Oliver thought for a second. "I don't really know," he admitted. "But people listen to him." Martha raised an eyebrow slightly, but said nothing. Outside, a car passed slowly. Its headlights swept across the window, then disappeared. Inside, the small house felt calm, safe. But something in the air had started to change. Oliver's phone buzzed. He jumped slightly. The screen lit up. Battery, 18%. Then, a list of missed calls appeared. Dozens of them. Annie leaned closer. "That's a lot." Oliver's face turned pale. "He's looking for me," he said. Martha stepped forward. "Call him," she said. Oliver nodded. His fingers trembled as he tapped the screen. He pressed one name. "Dad." The phone rang once, twice, then a voice answered immediately. "Oliver." Everything in the room shifted. Oliver's entire body changed the moment he heard that voice. "Dad," he breathed, and the fear he had been holding inside all night finally broke. "Dad, I'm here." On the other end, the man didn't hesitate. "Where are you? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay," Oliver said quickly, almost rushing the words. "I got lost, but I'm safe. I'm in a house. They helped me." There was a pause, but not the kind filled with doubt. The kind filled with control. "Put an adult on the phone." Oliver looked up, his small hand trembling slightly as he held the device toward Martha. She stepped forward slowly and took it, her expression calm but guarded. "This is Martha Carter," she said. "The boy is safe." A quiet silence followed, and then the man spoke again, slower now, measured. "Ma'am, thank you." Martha didn't soften. Any decent person would do the same. "I'm on my way," he replied. "Give me your address." Martha gave it clearly, without hesitation. her voice steady, like she had nothing to hide, and nothing to fear. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, the man said. The line went dead. Martha handed the phone back to Oliver. "He's coming," she said. Oliver nodded, clutching the phone tightly like it was something alive. Annie smiled, her eyes bright. "See? I told you everything would be okay." Oliver looked at her for a second, something quiet settling inside him. "Yeah," he said softly. "You did." Martha turned back toward the stove, but her movements had changed. Slower. More thoughtful. 20 minutes. She glanced at the clock on the wall, then toward the window. Something about that man's voice stayed with her. It wasn't just worry. It was something heavier. Authority. Outside, the street remained quiet, like nothing had happened. But inside the house, the air felt different now. Annie slid off her chair and walked toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. "What are you looking for?" Martha asked without turning. "I don't know," Annie said. "Just wondering what his dad looks like." Oliver gave a small smile. "He's tall," he said. Annie rolled her eyes playfully. "That doesn't help." Oliver let out a quiet laugh, the kind that didn't come from fear anymore. Minutes passed. Slow. Heavy. The clock ticked louder than usual. Oliver kept checking his phone, even though he knew his father was already on the way. Martha dried her hands on a towel and stood still for a moment, her eyes drifting again toward the window. Then, a low sound. Distant. Engines. Not one. More. Annie's head snapped toward the door. "Did you hear that?" Martha didn't answer. She walked slowly toward the window and pulled the curtain back. Her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. Annie rushed beside her and peeked outside. Her eyes widened instantly. "Grandma." Down the street, headlights approached. Not scattered. Not random. Aligned. Dark vehicles moved together, slow and controlled, like they already knew exactly where they were going. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. They arrived. One by one. And then they stopped. Right in front of the house. The engines idled low, steady, like something waiting. Inside, no one spoke. Oliver stood up from his chair, his small fingers tightening around the phone. "He's here," he whispered. Martha placed a hand gently on Annie's shoulder. "Stay behind me." Annie didn't argue. She felt it too now. That shift. That invisible weight pressing into the room. Outside, a car door opened. Then another. Footsteps followed. Not hurried. Not uncertain. Measured. Confident. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the door. The handle turned. And the door opened. Cold air slipped inside again, but this time it carried something else with it. Presence. A man stepped into the doorway. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in a dark coat that looked untouched by the cold. He didn't rush forward. He didn't need to. Everything about him moved with quiet control. Behind him, silhouettes of other men remained near the cars, but none of them stepped inside. They didn't have to. The house already felt smaller. Oliver didn't hesitate. "Dad!" He ran forward, his small feet hitting the floor in uneven steps. The man dropped to one knee instantly, arms opening before Oliver even reached him. When they collided, he held his son tightly. For a brief moment, the world outside disappeared. "I've got you," the man whispered, his voice no longer controlled, no longer distant. "You're safe." Oliver clung to him. "I'm sorry," he said into his coat. "I didn't mean to get lost." The man shook his head, his hand pressing gently against the back of the boy's head. "No," he said softly. "You're okay." Annie stood frozen near the table. She had never seen anything like this before. Not the cars. Not the men outside. Not even the coat. It wasn't about any of that. It was the way this man held his son. Like nothing else in the world mattered. Martha watched quietly from behind Annie. Her eyes sharp. Observing. Measuring. Because she had seen men like this before. Not loud. Not flashy. But powerful in a way that didn't need to prove itself. The man slowly stood, still holding Oliver. Then his eyes lifted. They moved across the room. First to Martha. Then to Annie. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then he stepped forward. "You're Martha Carter," he said. It wasn't a question. Martha nodded. "That's right." He adjusted Oliver slightly in his arms, then extended his hand. "William Whitmore." Martha looked at his hand, then at his face. She shook it. Firm. Unshaken. "Your boy's been safe here," she said. William nodded once. "I can see that." His gaze shifted to Annie. She stood still, her hands folded in front of her, unsure what to do now that everything had changed. He studied her quietly. Something in his expression softened. "You must be Annie." She nodded. "Yes, sir." William looked at Oliver. "Is she the one who helped you?" Oliver pulled back slightly. "She opened the door," he said, "and gave me food and helped charge my phone." William looked back at Annie. There was no smile. But there was something deeper. Respect. "Thank you," he said. Annie shifted slightly. "I just opened the door." Martha crossed her arms lightly. "That's more than most people do," she said. William didn't argue. He glanced around the house. The worn furniture. The patched walls. The quiet dignity of a place that had very little, but gave everything. His eyes stopped at the table. The bowl. The spoon. The empty space where his son had been sitting. Then slowly, he reached into his coat. His hand moved slowly inside his coat, and for just a second, Annie felt her breath catch. Martha didn't move. She didn't step back. She didn't flinch. She just watched. William pulled out a thick envelope and held it for a moment, then placed it gently on the table. No rush. No show. Just quiet intention. "For your kindness," he said. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Annie's eyes shifted from the envelope to her grandmother. Martha didn't even look at it. "No," she said. William paused. It wasn't confusion on his face. It was something closer to surprise. "I said no," Martha repeated, her voice calm, steady. "We don't take money for helping a child." Silence filled the room again. Outside, one of the car engines shut off, the low hum fading into the night. William looked at her carefully. Most people didn't say no to him. Not like that. Not without hesitation. But there was no pride in Martha's voice. No anger. Just principle. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. But he didn't pick the envelope back up. Instead, he rested his hand lightly on the table beside it. "Then don't think of it as payment," he added. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Think of it as making things right," he continued. "Because tonight, if you hadn't opened that door—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Annie looked at Oliver. Oliver looked down. They both understood. Martha's expression softened. Just a little. But not enough. "Raising a child right," she said slowly, "that's how you make things right." William's eyes held hers. "I intend to." Martha nodded once. "Then that's enough for me." The words settled between them. Not as rejection. Not as agreement. Something in between. William stood still for a moment longer. Then he picked up the envelope. But instead of putting it away, he placed it back down. Closer this time. Not as an offer. As a promise. I don't forget things like this, he said quietly. Martha didn't respond. But she didn't push it away either. And that was an answer. Oliver shifted slightly in his father's arms, then looked toward Annie. Can I come back? He asked. The question caught the room off guard. Simple. Honest. Annie blinked. Martha glanced at William. William looked down at his son, then back at Annie. For the first time since he arrived, a faint smile touched his face. We'll see, he said. It wasn't a no. It wasn't even a maybe. It was something more open. Something that hadn't been there before. Annie smiled. That means yes later, she said softly. Oliver grinned. William adjusted his coat slightly. It's time to go, he said. This time, Oliver didn't argue. But he didn't rush either. He looked at Annie. Thank you, he said again. Annie shrugged lightly. You already said that. I know, Oliver replied. But I mean it more now. She nodded. I know. They stood there for a second longer than necessary. Like neither of them wanted to be the first to step away. Then William turned toward the door. He paused just before stepping out. His eyes moved across the house again. The table. The stove. The quiet space that had given his son something he couldn't buy. Then he looked at Martha. And Annie. Kindness like this, he said quietly, it doesn't disappear. Then he stepped outside. Cold air followed him out. The door closed. The engines started again. One by one. The sound faded into the distance. And just like that, they were gone. Silence returned to the house. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one felt heavier. Like something had passed through, and left something behind. Annie stood near the door, still looking at it. Grandma. Martha didn't answer right away. She walked slowly back to the table. Her eyes dropped to the envelope. Still there. Untouched. I think that boy was never really alone, she said finally. Annie turned. But he was lost. Martha nodded. Yes, she said. But not in the way we thought. Annie walked back to her chair and climbed up slowly. He was still scared, she said quietly. Martha looked at her. And that's the part that matters, she replied. The room settled again. The radio hummed softly in the background. Outside, the street went back to normal. Like nothing had happened. But inside, everything felt just a little different. Martha reached out and picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. She turned it over in her hands. Then placed it back down. Annie watched her closely. Aren't you going to open it? She asked. Martha shook her head. Not tonight. Why not? Martha leaned back in her chair, her voice thoughtful. Because money has a way of changing how you feel about things, she said. And I want to remember tonight the way it really was. Annie tilted her head. The way it really was? Martha nodded. A boy knocked on our door, she said. He was cold. He was hungry. And we let him in. She looked at Annie. That's the part that matters. Annie thought about that. Then nodded slowly. Okay. For a while, neither of them spoke. Martha stood and began clearing the table. Annie helped, carrying the empty bowl carefully to the sink. Careful, Martha said. I got it, Annie replied. She placed it down gently. Then looked up. Do you think he'll come back? Martha paused for a moment. Then she smiled. Just a little. People don't forget how you make them feel, she said. Annie smiled too. I hope he does. Martha didn't answer, but her eyes drifted back to the envelope. Something about it didn't sit right. Not the money. Not the gesture. Something else. Something unfinished. Later that night, after Annie had gone to bed, the house fell quiet again. Martha walked back into the kitchen. The envelope was still there, waiting. She stood there for a long moment, just looking at it. Then slowly, she reached for it. Her fingers rested on the edge. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside, her breath caught. Not just money. More than she had expected. More than she had seen in years. Her hand tightened slightly. For a second, the room felt smaller, heavier. Not because of fear. Because of possibility. Fix the roof. Pay the bills. Make life easier. She closed her eyes briefly, then placed everything back inside. Sealed it. Carefully. Money don't change who you are, she whispered softly. It just shows who you've been. She walked to a small cabinet in the corner and pulled out an old metal box. Worn. Scratched. She placed the envelope inside, locked it, and put it back. Out of sight. For now. The house went dark. But sleep didn't come easily. Martha lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Thinking about the boy. About the man. About the way those cars had arrived. And the way they had left. There was power in that silence. The kind that didn't need to explain itself. She turned to her side and whispered softly into the dark. Keep that child safe. She wasn't sure which one she meant. In the other room, Annie shifted in her sleep. A faint smile crossed her face. And somewhere, across the city, a man sat awake in a much larger house, thinking about a small wooden door that had been opened without a question. Because sometimes, one night doesn't end when the door closes. Sometimes, that's where everything begins. Morning came quietly, like it didn't want to disturb anything that had changed. Soft light slipped through the curtains, stretching across the worn floor and climbing slowly up the walls. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Annie woke up earlier than usual. For a moment, she just sat there in bed, holding her blanket close, staring at the ceiling like she was trying to hold onto something before it faded. Then she remembered. The knock. The boy. The cars. Her eyes widened slightly. Oliver, she whispered to herself. She slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway, her steps light but quick. Grandma, she called softly. In the kitchen, baby. Annie walked in to find Martha already awake, standing by the stove, a cup of coffee resting nearby. The radio played quietly, the same way it always did, but Martha wasn't moving much. She was thinking. You're up early, Martha said without turning. So are you, Annie replied. Martha gave a faint smile. Old habits. Annie climbed into her chair and rested her chin on her hands. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Annie said it. I had a dream about him. Martha glanced at her. Did you now? Annie nodded. He came back. We were eating again, and he wasn't scared anymore. Martha looked down at her coffee. That sounds like a good dream. Annie hesitated, then asked quietly, Do you think he remembers us? Martha didn't answer right away. She took a slow sip, then set the cup down. People remember how you make them feel, she said. More than anything else. Annie seemed to think about that. Then she nodded. Okay. The moment settled gently between them. Outside, the neighborhood began to wake up. A car passed. A dog barked in the distance. Normal life. But something inside Annie felt different. Restless. Then, a sound. Low. Heavy. Not close, but not far either. Annie turned toward the window. Grandma. Martha's eyes lifted slowly. She didn't speak. She just listened. The sound grew clearer. Engines. More than one. Annie slid off her chair and ran to the window, pulling the curtain back. Her face lit up instantly. They're here. Martha didn't rush. She walked over slowly and looked outside. This time, it was different. Not a line of cars. Just one. Sleek. Quiet. Parked neatly at the curb. That's different, she murmured, before Annie could say anything else. Knock. This time, it wasn't uncertain. It was firm. Measured. Annie looked up at her grandmother. Martha straightened her shoulders. Stay behind me, she said. She walked to the door and opened it. William Whitmore stood there. But something had changed. He wasn't frantic anymore. He wasn't searching. He looked exactly like what he was. A man who controlled everything around him. And yet, there was something else now. Something quieter. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, he said. Martha met his gaze. Mr. Whitmore. Annie peeked from behind her. Hi, she said. William's expression softened immediately. Good morning, Annie. He paused for a moment, then glanced slightly toward the street. May I come in? Martha hesitated. Just a second. Then stepped aside. Come in. He entered slowly. Not like before. This time, he seemed more aware of where he was. Like he understood this house wasn't something you just walked through. It was something you stepped into. Where's Oliver? Annie asked quickly. William's lips curved faintly. He's safe, he said. And he hasn't stopped talking about this place. Annie smiled, her eyes lighting up. Really? William nodded. He asked me 3 times this morning if he could come back. Martha crossed her arms lightly. That so? William turned toward her. Yes, ma'am. Then he reached into his coat again. But this time, there was no envelope. It was a folder. Clean. Structured. He placed it gently on the table. Martha didn't touch it. What's this? She asked. William looked at her steadily. This is me keeping my word. Martha's expression didn't change. I didn't agree to anything. I know, he said. He opened the folder slowly. Inside were documents. Neat. Precise. I've arranged for repairs, he said. The roof. Plumbing. Heating. Martha's eyes flickered slightly. And medical coverage, he added. For you. That made her still. And a scholarship fund, he continued, glancing briefly at Annie, for her education. Silence filled the room. Annie looked between them. Grandma, what's a scholarship? Martha didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on William. Why? She asked. William didn't hesitate. Because last night, when my son needed help, you didn't ask who he was. He looked at Annie. You didn't ask what he could give you. Then back to Martha. You just helped him. His voice lowered slightly. Most people don't do that anymore. Martha studied him carefully. And you think money makes that equal? William shook his head. No. He stepped back slightly. I think nothing makes it equal. The honesty in that answer lingered. Annie looked at her grandmother. Grandma, can we say yes? Martha didn't respond immediately. Her eyes moved from William to the folder, to Annie. Then she sighed softly. Not tired. Not defeated. Just thinking. You don't owe us anything, she said. I know, William replied. And this won't change who we are. It shouldn't, he agreed. Martha nodded once, slowly. Then she reached out and placed her hand on the folder. Not fully accepting. not fully refusing, just acknowledging. "That's as far as I go today," she said. William gave a small nod. "That's enough." Annie broke into a smile. "Does that mean Oliver can come visit?" William looked at her. Then, for the first time since he arrived, he smiled fully. "Yes," he said, "I think it does." The room shifted again. Not because of money, not because of power, but because something real had been allowed to grow. Outside, the car remained still. Inside, Annie could barely sit still. "Is he coming today?" she asked. William checked his watch, then looked back at her. "He's already on his way." Annie's eyes widened. "What?" Martha turned slightly. "You brought him?" William nodded. He didn't want to wait. And just then, from outside, a car door closed. Annie's heart jumped. Her feet were already moving before anyone said a word. She ran toward the door, and stopped just before opening it. For a second, she just stood there, smiling, like she already knew. Then slowly, she reached for the handle. She opened the door, and there he was. Oliver stood on the porch, not cold, not afraid, just smiling. "I came back," he said, like he had been holding those words in all morning. Annie didn't hesitate. "I knew you would," she replied. They didn't stop to think. They didn't hold back. She stepped forward, and he did the same. And just like that, they met in the middle, like they had done it 100 times before. Behind him, the car sat quietly at the curb. No long line. No show of power. Just one vehicle. William stepped up onto the porch a moment later, watching the two children with a quiet kind of attention. Martha moved closer to the doorway. "You're early," she said. William gave a small nod. He didn't want to wait. Oliver looked back at his father, then at Annie. "Can I come in?" he asked. Annie grabbed his hand without even thinking. "Of course you can." Martha stepped aside. "Shoes off," she said automatically. Oliver stopped, slipped them off neatly, and placed them by the door. That small gesture didn't go unnoticed. Martha watched it, her eyes softening just slightly. Inside, the house felt warmer than it had the night before. Not because of the stove. Because of the laughter. Oliver walked straight toward the table like he remembered exactly where it was. "This is where we sat," he said. Annie nodded proudly. "Yeah, and today we have cookies." Oliver's eyes lit up. "Really?" Martha shook her head with a faint smile. "You two sit," she said. "I'll bring them." William stepped inside slowly, taking in the room again. He noticed the small things this time. The way the chairs didn't match. The way the light came in through the window. The way nothing in the room tried to impress anyone. And yet, it felt complete. "It looks different," he said quietly. Martha didn't turn. "Still the same house." William nodded. "Yes," he said. "I can see that." At the table, Annie and Oliver were already talking over each other. "I brought my tablet," Oliver said. "We can draw." "I'll show you my crayons," Annie replied. "Some of them are short, but they still work." Oliver smiled. "Short ones are better," he said. "They don't break as easy." Martha placed a plate of cookies between them. "Slow down," she said. "You'll trip over your own words." They both laughed. William leaned slightly against the wall, watching. Not speaking. Just observing. For a moment, the room felt like it had forgotten who he was. And for the first time, he didn't mind. Oliver picked up a cookie, then paused. He broke it in half, and handed the bigger piece to Annie. "Here." Annie frowned slightly. No, you take it. You had them first, Oliver said. Annie shook her head. You were the guest first. They both hesitated. Then Oliver smiled. Then we share. He broke the pieces again, making them even. Martha noticed. William noticed. Neither of them said anything. But something passed between them. Something understood. After a while, Annie jumped up. Come on, she said, grabbing Oliver's hand. I'll show you my room. They ran down the hallway together, their laughter trailing behind them. The house fell quieter again. But not empty. William remained where he was for a moment. Then he stepped forward. You were right, he said. Martha didn't look up. About what? About raising him. Martha dried her hands slowly before turning. That's your job, she said. Not mine. William nodded. I thought giving him everything he needed was enough. Martha studied him. That's not the same thing. William met her gaze. Then what is? Martha's expression softened just a little. Being there, she said. When it matters. The words were simple, but they carried weight. From down the hall, Annie's voice echoed. Don't touch that, it's broken. A pause. Then laughter. William's lips curved slightly. That's something I can't buy, he said. Martha allowed herself a faint smile. No, sir, she replied. That's something you earn. William looked down briefly, then back up. I've spent my whole life building something, he said. And I think I missed something else along the way. Martha didn't rush to answer. Happens more often than you think. A moment passed between them. Not tense. Not uncomfortable. Just real. Then footsteps. The children returned, slightly out of breath, still smiling. Can he stay longer? Annie asked immediately. William checked his watch, then looked at Oliver. Then back at Annie. Yes, he said. He can stay a little longer. Annie cheered softly. Oliver grinned. Martha shook her head. Just don't run through the house. No promises, Annie replied, already pulling Oliver back toward the living room. Their footsteps echoed again. Light. Carefree. Alive. William watched them go. Then he slowly moved toward the window. Outside, the street looked the same. Ordinary. But he knew it wasn't. Not anymore. Behind him, Martha returned to the kitchen. You can sit, she said. William turned slightly. I'm fine. Martha nodded. That's the problem, she said quietly. William frowned slightly. What do you mean? Martha didn't look at him. You've been fine your whole life, she said. And that's why you didn't see what wasn't. The words lingered. William didn't respond immediately, because deep down, he understood. In the living room, Annie and Oliver sat on the floor, surrounded by crayons and paper. What are you drawing? Annie asked. Oliver didn't look up. A house. That's easy. Oliver shook his head. Not just a house. He paused, then added quietly. A safe one. Annie tilted her head. What's that? Oliver thought for a second. It's a place where you don't feel scared. The words were simple, but they landed differently. Annie looked at the drawing, then back at him. You mean like here? Oliver nodded. Yeah. Annie smiled. Then draw it bigger. Oliver looked up. Why? So more people can fit. He smiled again, and kept drawing. From across the room, William watched. His eyes didn't leave the paper. The lines weren't perfect. The shapes were uneven. But the meaning was clear. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something he didn't recognize right away. Not control. Not power. Something quieter. Something heavier. Something real. Then Oliver spoke again, without looking up. Dad. William stepped closer. Yes. Oliver hesitated for a second, then said softly, Can Annie come to our house next time? The room went still. The room went still. Not because the question was loud, but because of what it meant. Two worlds, quietly reaching toward each other. William didn't answer right away. He looked at Oliver first, then at Annie. Then, slowly, his eyes moved to Martha. She stood near the counter, arms loosely crossed, watching him the way she always did, like she wasn't listening to his words, but to what was behind them. William took a breath. Maybe, he said. Annie's face lit up instantly. That means yes, she whispered to Oliver. Oliver smiled, but his eyes stayed on his father. William noticed, and for a moment, something shifted in him again. I mean it, he added, his voice softer now. If your grandmother agrees. All eyes turned to Martha. She didn't react right away. She stepped closer, wiping her hands slowly on a towel. Inviting someone into your home, she said, ain't the same as letting them visit. William nodded slightly. I understand. Martha looked at Annie, then back at William. We'll think about it. Annie sighed. That means maybe. Martha raised an eyebrow. That means we think first. Oliver smiled. That's fair. The moment eased, but something remained underneath it. A quiet understanding. Not everything could be rushed. Not everything should be. Time passed gently after that. The sun moved higher, filling the room with a soft, steady light. In the living room, the drawings spread across the floor. Houses. Stick figures. Big suns and uneven trees. Simple things. But every one of them carried something real. This one's you, Annie said, pointing at a drawing. Oliver leaned closer. And that's you? Yeah. And that's your grandma? Annie nodded. She's always watching. Oliver looked at the drawing again. That's good. Why? So nobody gets lost. Annie didn't answer. She just looked at the paper, then slowly nodded. Across the room, William checked his watch. Not out of urgency. Habit. A lifetime of schedules still lingering in his bones. Martha noticed. You got somewhere to be? She asked. William shook his head. Not as important as this. Martha nodded once. That answer mattered. In the kitchen, she began preparing something simple. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to. You'll eat before you go, she said. William opened his mouth to respond. Then paused. Then nodded. Yes, ma'am. At the table, Annie looked excited. Dinner. Oliver looked surprised. We can stay? Annie grinned. Of course. Oliver glanced at his father. William met his eyes. We'll stay. The word felt different this time. Not scheduled. Not planned. Chosen. In the kitchen, Martha moved with quiet confidence. Annie hovered nearby. Can I help? You can set the table. I'll do it, Annie said quickly. Oliver followed her. I'll help too. Okay, Annie said. You do the forks. I know how to do forks. I hope so. Their voices filled the space again. Easy. Natural. Unforced. William stood still for a moment, watching them. Then he stepped closer to Martha. You don't have to do all this, he said quietly. I know, she replied. Then why do it? She stirred the pot once more, then turned slightly. Because feeding people is how you show them they matter. William didn't respond. He just absorbed it. Across the room, Annie carefully placed each plate. "Grandma says the plate goes here," she explained. "And the fork goes on this side." Oliver followed closely. "What about the spoon?" "That depends." "On what?" "On if we're having soup." Oliver thought about it. "Then we should put one, just in case." Annie nodded. "Good idea." Martha smiled to herself. Prepared, even in small things. Soon, they were all seated at the table. The same table. But it felt fuller now. William sat more naturally this time. Less aware of himself. More present. Martha placed the food in the center. "Help yourselves." Annie reached first. Oliver followed. William hesitated, then served himself. No one rushed him. No one watched him. And somehow, that made it easier. They ate quietly at first. Not awkward. Just comfortable. Then Annie spoke. "Oliver, what do you eat at home?" Oliver shrugged. "Different stuff." "Like what?" He glanced at his father. William answered instead. "Whatever he wants." Annie frowned. "That sounds confusing." Oliver nodded. "Sometimes it is." Martha set her fork down. "That's because choice without guidance don't help a child," she said. William looked at her. "I thought giving him everything was the best way." Martha shook her head. "Children don't need everything," she said. "They need enough." The words settled into the room. Quiet, but heavy. Oliver looked down at his plate. Then at Annie. Then at his father. William leaned back slightly. Listening. Learning. After a moment, Oliver spoke again. "Dad." William looked at him. "Yes. Can Annie come to our house next time?" The question came softer this time. But it carried more weight. William didn't answer immediately. He looked at Martha. Then Annie. Then Oliver. He understood now. This wasn't just a visit. It was a crossing. A bridge. Between two lives that didn't usually meet. "Yes," he said finally. "She can." Annie's eyes lit up. "Really?" William nodded. "If your grandmother agrees." Again, all eyes turned to Martha. She took her time, then said slowly, "We'll see." Annie groaned softly. "That means maybe again." Martha raised an eyebrow. "That means we don't rush things we don't understand yet." William nodded slightly. "I respect that." Dinner continued. Slower now. More thoughtful. The light outside began to fade. Shadows stretched across the floor. Inside, something settled. Not temporary. Not fragile. Something steady. After the plates were cleared, Annie grabbed Oliver's hand. "Come on," she said. "One more thing." They ran down the hallway again. Their laughter echoing softly. William remained at the table for a moment. Then stood slowly. "This isn't something I'm used to," he admitted. Martha gathered the plates. "Which part?" "All of it." She rinsed one plate. Then another. "That's probably why it matters." William looked toward the hallway. "They're comfortable here." "Yes. That doesn't happen easily." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." He hesitated. Then asked quietly, "How do you do that?" Martha dried her hands before answering. "You don't make people feel comfortable," she said. "You make space and let them decide." William stood still, taking that in. Space. Not control. Not structure. Something he had never really practiced. From down the hall, Annie's voice rose again. "This is my favorite book." Oliver replied, "It's small." That's because it's special. William's eyes softened slightly. Something in that simple exchange stayed with him. After a moment, he checked his watch again. Not habit this time. Reality. We should go soon, he said gently. Martha nodded. Children need rest. The words hung there. Quiet. But they carried something else too. A reminder. Not everything lasts forever. And in the hallway, the laughter suddenly felt a little more fragile. The laughter in the hallway softened, like it understood time was catching up. Annie and Oliver walked back into the room a moment later, slower now, still smiling, but quieter. Do you really have to go? Annie asked. William didn't answer right away. He looked at Oliver, then at Annie, then, finally, at Martha. Yes, he said gently, but not for the reason it used to be. Oliver stepped closer. What does that mean? William knelt slightly so he was eye level with his son. It means, he said, I'm not leaving because I have something more important to do. I'm leaving because I know where we can come back to. Oliver held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no confusion in his eyes, just understanding. Annie looked between them, then quietly stepped back, giving them space she didn't even realize she was offering. Martha watched from the side. She saw it. That shift. That moment when a man stopped being just a provider and started becoming a father. Oliver reached out and held onto William's sleeve. Are we really coming back? William nodded. We are. The answer wasn't rushed. It wasn't for comfort. It was a promise. Oliver let go slowly, then turned to Annie. I'll come back tomorrow, he said. Annie smiled, but this time, it was softer. You don't have to rush, she said. Oliver tilted his head. Why not? Annie shrugged lightly. Because you're not lost anymore. The words settled into the room, and something inside William tightened. Not pain. Not regret. Something deeper. Truth. Martha stepped forward, her voice calm but steady. Child's right, she said. When you know where you belong, you don't need to run back to it. William looked at her. For a second, it felt like she wasn't just talking to Oliver. She was talking to him. He stood up slowly. I've spent years building something big, he said. But I never stopped to ask if it was enough. Martha didn't interrupt. She let him say it, because some realizations had to come out on their own. William exhaled slowly. And it wasn't, he added. The room stayed quiet. But it wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest. Oliver looked up at him. Does that mean you're gonna stay more? William's eyes softened. Yes, he said. It does. Oliver smiled. A real one. The kind that didn't fade quickly. Across from them, Annie leaned lightly against the table, watching everything unfold like she didn't want to miss a single second of it. Then she stepped forward again. Wait, she said. Everyone looked at her. She walked over to the table and picked up one of the drawings. The one Oliver had made earlier. The house. The big one. With uneven lines and too many windows. She held it out to him. You forgot this. Oliver looked at it, then at her. No, he said softly. That stays here. Annie frowned slightly. Why? Oliver pointed at the drawing. That's not just a house, he said. That's this place. Annie looked down at it again. Then slowly, she nodded. Okay. William watched that exchange closely. Something about it stayed with him. Something simple. Something real. Martha stepped toward the door. Go on now, she said gently. Night's coming. This time, no one argued. No one delayed. Because this goodbye didn't feel like the last one. Oliver put his shoes on carefully, then turned back to Annie. "Thank you," he said. Annie smiled. "You don't have to say it every time." "I know," he replied. "But I want to." She nodded. "I like that." William moved toward the door, then paused. He looked at Martha, then at Annie, then around the house one last time. "I meant what I said," he said quietly. This changed something. Martha met his gaze. "That's what kindness does," she replied. William nodded, then added, almost to himself, "I just wish I had understood it sooner." Martha gave a small, knowing look. Better now than never. He accepted that, not as comfort, as truth. They stepped outside. The cool air wrapped around them, but it didn't feel cold anymore. Oliver turned back once more. "Good night, Annie." "Good night, Oliver." William stood beside him, then spoke one last time. "Take care of each other," he said. It wasn't directed at one person. It was for both of them. Martha nodded. "We always do." The car door closed. The engine started. And this time, as the vehicle pulled away, it didn't feel like something was leaving. It felt like something had been planted. Inside the house, Annie stood near the door for a long moment. Then she turned back slowly. "Grandma." Martha was already walking toward the table. "Yes, baby?" Annie looked at the drawing again. The house. The figures. The space that held more than just lines. "Did we do something big?" Martha smiled softly. "No," she said. Annie frowned. "It feels big." Martha stepped closer and gently placed her hand over Annie's. "That's because the biggest things," she said, "don't look big when they happen." Annie looked up at her. "Then what do they look like?" Martha glanced around the room. At the chairs. The table. The quiet. "They look like this," she said. Annie followed her gaze. And slowly, she understood. Because that night wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It wasn't even about who was rich or who was poor. It was about a door. A simple door. And the choice to open it. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change a life. Or two. Or more. Because in the end, what stays with people isn't what you give them. It's how you make them feel when they have nothing. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Because kindness like this deserves to be shared.